Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm so pleased that you've joined us today for this very unique podcast where we not only feature the fascinating world of serial killers while enjoying award-winning wine, but we profile them also. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's actually captured a serial killer. Yeah, you can't make that up. A real serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine to do it, but this is real wine and real true crime. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on all of our podcast platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and iHeartRadio. Well, Brandy joins me, and we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world, while enjoying, of course, our favorite wines. I've got my favorite Casaro wine today. It's our Primitivo. It's a Italian Zinfandel, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Right now, I want you to take a minute, pour yourself a great glass of murderous Merlot or maybe killer Cabernet, and enjoy this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of David Parker Ray, a serial killer who was so organized that he spent over $100,000 outfitting a special soundproof trailer just so he could abduct, torture, and kill his victims. Now, I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a very unique case because the killer not only would abduct and torture his victims, he'd keep them hostage for weeks or sometimes months before killing them or releasing them out on a lonely highway in a drug-induced state. How do you stop a killer who's so organized?
Well, the organization part is what's tricky because sometimes the killers like to kidnap, sometimes they like to rape, sometimes they like to torture. But with this guy, he liked everything. And it was definitely a game to him.
Yeah, certainly it was a game that he played for a very long time and a very unique case, Brandy, because of all of his victims and his multiple convictions. He was never, ever convicted of killing someone.
Okay, John. So today we're talking about serial killer David Parker Ray, born November 6, 1939 in Bella, New Mexico, died in 2002 in Hobbs, New Mexico. So we always talk about, every serial killer has their MO, their thrill. But this guy was kidnapping, raping, and torturing 4 to 5 victims per year and holding them captive for 2 to 3 months. Not only, yeah, go ahead.
Really strange, isn't
Very
that?
strange.
I mean, we usually see a day, 2, 3 days, sometimes a week, but I picking apart elements of this, you're right. Sometimes 2 or 3 months. Crazy.
I mean, I don't even know how you keep someone alive for that long with raping them, torturing them. I'm sure we're going to get into what some of these victims had to deal with. But to even make it worse, he was actually assisted by accomplices that he knew, a friend, a girlfriend at one time, and his own daughter. And he used a customized trailer for his victims. His daughter would actually help lure them. But he is a suspected serial killer in over 60 murders. And as you mentioned earlier, he was convicted of none of them, John.
This is really, we try to pick fascinating and unique cases, and usually there's 1 or 2 unique elements, right, to each case that we choose. Here, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 right off the top. Keeping the victims for 2 to 3 months, very different, very unique. we've seen, and Brandy and you and I have covered many serial killers that have had an accomplice. Some of them, subservient or submissive,
Mhm.
some co-dominant with them. But have we ever had one that had a female accomplice that was his girlfriend, but then there was a male accomplice and then his own daughter that helped lure victims to him? Fascinating. The trailer is beyond belief. And you and I talked before the show as we're prepping. We featured a number of serial killers that have customized their vehicle, usually a van, maybe built-in restraints. We had one that took off the locks on the inside so they couldn't open the door and escape. But nothing to the level of $100,000 plus customized soundproof trailer, and we'll get into that. And then to top it all off, he's suspected of over 60 murders
Mm.
and yet convicted of none. Just continually unique. I don't know where to stop with this
Mhm.
case, but let's
Yeah.
get into it.
Well, and also you talked about the organization side of this, and how organized this was, with these accomplices. So yeah, we're going to talk more about that, but we always start with the early life. Were there any red flags? Are there any signs of this kind of thing happening in the adolescence? So he is born to Cecil Ray and Nettie Opal Parker. The parents had some financial issues, which actually led him and his sister Peggy to live with their grandparents on a ranch. The grandparents were said to be very strict. Um, there was abuse. His father was an alcoholic. He only visited his kids sporadically. But he would provide sadomasochistic porn magazines, John, to his kid.
Yeah, no, very interesting, and his sister actually talked about this, saying when Dad would visit us at the grandparents, he'd bring David just horrible porn magazines and made it like it was normal. So, yeah, there's red flags from the very beginning here. So we start seeing the red flags like we do in many of these cases at a very early age. And it's amazing how many of these are tied to financial issues, trauma at home. And then I just can't believe how many times you and I have talked about grandparents
I know.
also being involved in these red flags.
And it is kind of, you always say we shouldn't go in the mind of these people and what they're doing, but this isn't the first time we've seen the grandparents. And now you have the father who is bringing pornographic magazines to his son. So then you start to think, was he subject to this kind of thing as a child? What makes this actually seem okay to them? But he's actually bullied in high school. He was shy around girls. He abused alcohol and drugs as a teen and had sexual fantasies. Well, why wouldn't he? He's looking at sadomasochistic torture porn.
Yep.
So he's got fantasies of rape, torture, and murder beginning in his adolescence.
Yeah, and again, his sister backs this up, and she said, "Hey, I saw some of those red flags when him and I were growing up." She actually said that she discovered some sadomasochistic drawings and bondage porn at 14. And like you said, with his dad providing it and encouraging it, as far as we know, it's no wonder he took a wrong turn here.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the sister found those drawings, but we also know that there was childhood abuse, again, exposure to the violent porn, which of course, as a 14-year-old adolescent, you're going to start envisioning some of these things, right? Of what you see. And then the bullying, they know, contributed to some of the sadistic traits. And again, that early fascination and sadism from abuse and pornography, which, John, we know he starts to act out as an adult killer.
Right. And we see that all throughout this series of kidnapping, rapes, torture, that he actually brought these fantasies from 13, 14, 15 years old. He brought them to life. And that is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying that it wasn't just about the sex with him. It was about the pain. It was about the torture. It was about the dominance. And so, we always talk about this. Serial killers, it's not like they flip a switch. They're
Right.
not mass shooters. They're not spree shooters. They're not triggered by an event. They evolve. And we can see this evolution over a long period because his exposure to it started at such a young age. And we can certainly see this serial killer is one that evolved.
Well, from being an adolescent, like you said, the visions that he's having, he then, acts that out in real life. But even as a young adult post high school, he joined the army. He was a general mechanic and then was honorably discharged
Yep.
from the U.S. Army. No confirmed crimes during that time, but the fantasies escalated. He's thinking more about the torture, probably fantasizing, like you said, actually bringing these to life. He left the army, and after he left the army, he actually returned to New Mexico. He was hired as a maintenance worker for the New Mexico Parks Department, so worked for the state. And then he actually worked there until he was arrested. But this
Yeah,
job,
very, very
yeah,
stable in a
very
job.
stable.
And as I look back on the cases that we've covered and things that I've worked on
Yeah.
over the years, it's amazing to me how so many of these guys do have a stable work life,
Yes.
right? But they are pure sociopaths and divide up and compartmentalize their life. They've got a stable work environment that they may have been in for years. Look at BTK, and I could
Yeah.
just go down the list of, these guys that worked, and it doesn't matter what level job they had, but they actually worked that job and stayed there for a long time. Well, they did these horrible things at night or on weekends or whenever. So this is another case of that. But this job was kind of unique because in working for, he was born in New Mexico. He was
hmm
raised in New Mexico, eventually died in New Mexico. This was certainly his comfort zone, his home territory. But working for the Parks Department, he learned about and had access to very remote and isolated areas. And so, do you think he took that job, Brandy, intentionally? Do you think he had that plan? We know that his fantasies increased during his military experience, started at a young age. Now he gets out, and the job that he takes is with the Parks Department, giving him access to these areas.
Yeah.
To me, again, I don't believe in coincidences. I think this is part of a much larger plan.
Yeah, and someone who is now living in New Mexico, I can only tell you how many remote and isolated areas there are. I mean, even I can think of so many just driving, a couple of hours from where I am. I mean, there are so many places to get lost, to commit crimes, and people cannot see you. To have vehicles in the middle of the desert, and nobody be able to tell what that is from a distance. I mean, roads where you can turn around and go down 20 miles, right? I mean, it just absolutely remote and isolated in a lot of these areas.
Where you could take somebody,
Oh my
no one would hear them scream.
Nope.
Where you could kill somebody or dump some body, and no one would know.
So we talked about the sexual fantasies, John, in the early crime. So there were sexual fantasies of rape, torture, and murdered, right? That started as a teenager. He claimed that the first assaults were as a teen. Do we know anything about that?
Well, we did hear from one of his wives that he did talk about some of these crimes.
Okay.
And he said that he would assault women as a teenager. Matter of fact, he said he started raping women when he was old enough to tie their hands behind their back. So again,
Okay.
this is that evolution. This is not a normal, say, sexual progression. Young guy meets a girl, falls in love, become romantic, have sex, all the rest of that stuff. this is a guy who's thinking about being with a woman in the context of, if I can tie her hands behind her back, then I can rape her. So
Yeah.
very, very different than anything, normalized out there in society. And his wife also told us that he admitted to her at some point during his marriage, that his first murder was in like 1957,
Mm.
and he murdered, kidnapped, tortured a woman, and actually tied her to a tree. So that's very specific.
Yeah.
Okay. You and I can be married, and I can be, drinking and having fun and telling stories and tell you a wild story.
Hmm. Right.
That's very specific, though.
Very
So when
specific.
we start getting elements of, yes, in 57, okay, it's giving us a date and a time and a place. I kidnapped somebody, I tortured them, I tied them to a tree, murdered them, and then dumped their body. That's not you and me having a
Right.
normal, oh, we're just having a conversation. You're giving very specific details. Unfortunately, we don't have a body to tie to the crime.
So he's telling his wife this. He is saying things about raping women. He was started raping when he was old enough to tie their hands behind their back, which again then goes with killing a woman tied to a tree. I kind
Yep.
of correlate the two of those coming from him. Now, we talked about his early life. We talked about his going into young adulthood. What are you picking up from a profiling perspective?
Well, right here, as a profiler, I'm already checking the boxes, right?
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
sitting here checking the boxes basically when you said welcome and we're going to start
Yeah.
the show, because there were so many, abusive parents, parents that abandoned him, parents that had bad financial conditions, grandparents. We know they were strict, but somehow he also got access to his father, who would come visit, provide the sadomasochistic magazines, the bondage porn, things like that. I'm putting that in the abuse category. It may not be physical abuse, but you don't do that to a young person. And we know that's what kickstarted these fantasies that he experienced at 14, 15, 16, that continued throughout his young adult life, even into the Army when he said he experienced it. We don't know anything about mental health issues, don't think there was any, or traumatic brain injury like we've seen with some other serial killers. Or even his level of intelligence, but we think it's about average, about normal. He did say he was a loner. He was shy around girls. We've seen that over and over. But the big red flag, the big box that we're checking here is exposure to, fascination with, pornography, bondage, torture, and him admitting to those crimes as a young person does check the box on crimes as a young adult. So with this individual, we're certainly checking
Mhm.
all of those boxes. And unfortunately, Brandy, from a very young age, and we've talked about a couple of these serial killers, and it's like, my gosh, do they even have a
I
chance?
know.
And this one's on the line. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was exposed to stuff, but he still made decisions
Mhm.
about what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it, right?
Right. I was thinking about his organization as a killer and then the organization of keeping a job that long, right? You have to be some sort of intelligent, have some sort of intelligence to keep a pretty steady job. He wasn't let go, or at least we know he wasn't held accountable for any actions. But sometimes they can and can't have relationships, actual real life relationships. Did he have any?
He had multiple relationships, but certainly when he started getting into the kidnapping and the torture and the bondage, the relationships were all based around these horrible crimes, right?
Right. So we know he had a couple of kids, and then we talk about that too, right? BTK.
Well, I think
You know,
if I remember right, didn't he have 2 children and 4 wives?
yeah, 2 kids, 4 wives.
Yeah.
And then one of those children ends up becoming, um, you know, an accomplice or helping lure victims. I mean, what do you just think about that in general? I mean, do you think that is just an overpowering mentally of your child? I mean, not only did he have 1, but he
Well,
ended up having 3.
yeah, 4 wives that 4
Mhm.
divorces that we know of, a
Mhm.
girlfriend that I don't think he ever technically married that was a major accomplice in this. The daughter, so I think we're going to get into it later, but I'll just tell you, the daughter actually went to the FBI
Mm.
years before he was arrested and said, "This is what my dad's doing." And they kind of blew her off. They didn't
My
believe her
God.
story. I don't know if this happened, but if you are thinking, and Brandy, tell me as a young girl, if
Mhm.
you're thinking, my dad's doing bad stuff, he's doing stuff that's really wrong, I'm going to go to the authorities and tell them.
Mhm.
You tell the authorities and they blow you off. Does that send a signal that, well, maybe I'm wrong?
Hey.
Maybe my
Mhm.
dad can do this stuff. Maybe that's the norm. And maybe she starts going down this path because she believes, well, if no one's going to do anything, maybe this is not as abnormal as I thought. Give me your
Yeah.
opinion.
I think you're right about that. I think as maybe a young girl or just a young woman being able to go to the FBI, being brave enough to go and speak up about something. How many times have we seen this, John? Like dropping the ball when they could have gone in and investigated and probably got this guy, you know, way before any of these other terrible things are going to happen. But I think you're right. I think she somehow said, well, if the police and FBI aren't even going to do anything about this, maybe if they're okay with my dad committing these crimes. Maybe this is just I mean, you have to think that. I mean, you're completely let down that you've gone to the authorities and they're not doing anything. So I think, you know, if you can't beat them, join them.
Somehow, maybe it was rationalized in her mind.
Yeah. I mean, that it's acceptable. I mean,
Yeah,
you've gone to the highest of authority, right, to
right.
explain this, and then nothing happens. It's sad, and you know, unfortunately, she's brought into this the kidnapping and torturing.
Yeah, so you've got all these weird, relationships,
Mhm.
multiple marriages and divorces, the girlfriend that's involved, friends that are involved, a daughter that's involved. But we're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So he told his first wife about a murder in 57.
Mhm.
But then we see a huge gap here, and we really don't see the first murder that we're tying him to, and it's circumstantial and only confirmed by his girlfriend, who said, hey, he admitted this to me. But it kind of does make sense when you piece it together, so I don't think it's a stretch. He was a mechanic, we know that.
Mhm.
When he came out of the army, he worked in Phoenix for a while in an auto repair shop. So he did that before he got the job at the state parks. The owner of the auto repair shop disappeared September 25th, 1988. And
Wow.
his body was found the 29th, 1988, in Elephant Butte Lake, and he was shot. Now, why this is significant is we are going to see the remains of bodies dumped in Elephant Butte Lake.
Mhm.
And we're going to hear testimony from multiple people that said, I think he dumped bodies there because he would tell me, I'm going to the lake.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you see how this is kind of fitting together.
Yeah.
And finally, in March of 99, so a decade later, they used dental records and finally identified, Billy Ray Bowers, who was a white male, 53 at the time, as that body that was shot and dumped in Elephant Butte Lake. So you do have, he was a mechanic, worked at a auto repair place. He had a boss, apparently had a falling out with his boss. The boss's body was found out at this lake where he is known to dump multiple bodies. And his accomplice / girlfriend, while in prison, told police, you know what? At one point, Ray did tell me, hey, I killed Bowers and I dumped him in the lake. So we're kind of thinking there's too much information from the murder in 57 to believe that he made it up. And there's too much information from the murder in 88 to think he made that up also. So I'm giving a lot of credence to, we're already seeing him start to commit some of these murders. Now, obviously, the auto shop murder was totally different. It was a male, not a female. He didn't tie him up like he tied up the females, but probably didn't torture or have sex with him. It might have been more a falling out as a boss, and I'm going to get rid of this guy, and then I'm going to go find a real job, and that's when he got hired on by the state of New Mexico.
Well, I mean, I also just find the timeline, right? 57 to 88. I mean, that's 31 years that he's just doing nothing. Like, I mean, it is kind of scary to think that there could have been
he's married 4 times during that period. So those are rocky relationships, and we don't know how many other victims. We talk about this when you have gaps. There's reasons that you have gaps. Do I think that he started murdering in 57 and had this bondage, pornography fascination? Maybe that's what he acted out with his wives, and that's why he was divorced 4 times. But maybe he was doing that and committing other crimes that we simply haven't tied to him.
So you mentioned Hendy. This is Cindy Hendy. She is ends up being an accomplice. It's his girlfriend, and of course a convicted felon after some of these things that she participated in. So they meet in the 1990s. A 37-year-old Park State employee. So she also worked for the Parks Department.
Yeah, that's where he met her. Yep. She worked with the Parks Department. He met her there. Yep.
So there were fleeing convictions for grand theft and drug charges in Washington. They did have a romantic relationship. They also shared violent sexual fantasies. Now, whether this started for her, John, as like a woman that might want that privately in her bedroom, right, with her one person. But we also know she ends up being an accomplice in these things. So I think it went much, much further than that.
How do these people find each other, Brandy?
I know.
This is amazing.
And in the state park employee as well. Right. I mean, you have the same job. I know.
He's a state park employee, so is she, but she's also on the run at this time. She's already a convicted and wanted felon on grand theft charges, and basically fled to New Mexico and got a job. I don't know, faulty background check or whatever. But how do these people? It's got to be something. I don't know, an aura around them. I don't understand it. How do you find somebody and go, wow? Yeah, I mean, does that come up on a first date, Brandy? You probably know this more than me. I've been married a very long time, but how does that come up? I mean, are you eating dinner and you start telling her, well, this is really what I'm into, and are you into it too? Because from the beginning, she was on board with these sexual fantasies and everything that he was doing.
I think there is a tendency to ask questions and to drop hints and to pick up and see how the other person is reacting to those thoughts and hints that you're dropping. And maybe there was some level of excitement in that for her. I mean, like you said, she was on the run, a convicted was wanted and fleeing to New Mexico. I mean, she's already not the best person at decision making and making good decisions. So I think this was probably exciting for her. I think it probably gave her someone that she could act these things out with. And we also know that he told his captives that they had to sexually service her as well.
Right.
So I think this is something she enjoyed.
Oh yeah, I just don't understand. I guess
I know.
you drop hints about this is what I'm into and this is what I enjoy, and if she doesn't pick up the wine and throw it you at
Mm-hmm.
dinner and walk out of the restaurant, then it's a hint that wow, maybe
Yeah.
she's into this.
Uh,
Uh,
Go ahead.
Amazing,
Yeah.
just amazing to me.
Well, not only was Cindy the girlfriend and accomplice, and she actually participated in the abductions and the torture, but Cindy's daughter, Jessie Ray, did the luring, and Dennis Nancy was the murder of Parker. So what do we know about Dennis, Cindy, Jessie Ray? How are they all working together? Is he working with them individually?
Yeah, it's kind of a team, you know, where he's with Cindy sometimes and alone. We don't really know Jessie Ray's level of involvement. She never does get convicted of murder. I probably don't believe that she ever participated in a murder. Did she know what her dad was doing? Yes, we already know she went to the FBI. Did she have an idea that it was wrong? Yes. But did she actively lure people to the trailer? Did she
Yeah.
deliver people to her dad? And some of the people that we have evidence that she kind of delivered, she may not have liked them anyway, or may have kind of gotten into it with them a little bit. And so maybe in her head, it was like, I know what I'm going to do with you. I'm bringing you to my dad. And we'll see what happens after that. So we know that she certainly helped in obtaining at least a few of the victims and bringing them to her father. With Dennis Yancey, he was just another sick individual that at some point fell in with David Ray and said, I guess I'm kind of into this too. And he was an accomplice not only in the rapes and the torture and the kidnapping, but the only murder conviction that comes out of all of this with all of these four individuals falls squarely on Dennis Yancey. And in court, he ended up saying, well, David told me to do it and I felt obligated. I was under his control. But very, very unique situation. You've got three different accomplices with three totally different backgrounds: your girlfriend, your own daughter, and then a friend. And you're able to convince them to commit these horrific crimes. Absolutely amazing. And in just a minute, we're going to get into some of these murders.
All right, John. So you mentioned we're going to start talking about some of these additional murders. We know we talked about Jessie Ray. How involved was she in luring or participating? But we know that 22-year-old white female Jill Troya, September 30th, 1995, was last seen with Jessie Ray in Albuquerque. Jessie had later told police that she had left with her dad, but Ray wrote detailed accounts of this in his diary of torturing a young woman who fit Jill Troya's description. So not seen again, last seen with Jessie Ray, and actually been writing about this in Ray's diary.
And Jessie Ray said, yes, I left her with my dad, right?
Yep,
so
that's right.
That's the tie. We see Jessie say, yes, we were together in Albuquerque. I left her with my dad. That's the last time I saw her. And then Ray writes in his diary, and we know he kept diary, he kept audio tapes, he kept videotapes. And in his diary, he wrote about torturing a young woman that fit Troya's description. Now, again, he was never convicted of any murders. I want to make sure that we say that. You know, the 57 with the woman, there never was any proof except the first wife saying he told me about it. Bowers, there really was never proof except Headley saying he described it in detail and he dumped him in the lake like he did the others. Same thing here. We don't have Troya's body, but we have a description in Ray's very detailed diary of a woman that fits her description. Same thing in 95, a couple months later, we have an Australian citizen that disappeared, and it was around the time, around the place that they think, listen, if we can ever get the forensic evidence together, we can tie her disappearance with his crimes. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands. And it's fitting to share with you what I'm enjoying today. It's a glass of our Primitivo. This is a full-bodied dry red wine, also referred to as an Italian Zinfandel. And it's typically very velvety, smooth, a little bit lower acidity, and perfect for that afternoon lunch. Primitivo pairs well with grilled meats and aged cheeses. And of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy while you're listening to your favorite true crime and wine podcast. Salute. And now, Brandy, let's talk about another, suspected murder tied to David Ray, Sylvia Marie Parker. And this is really strange because it was reported that Parker was Dennis Yancey's girlfriend. So it's his girlfriend, and yet we know that somehow he lures her or brings her to the trailer. Ray orders Yancey to kill her and dump her body, and Yancey does that. They then find body parts in a bag in Elephant Butte Lake in June of 90, so 3 years later. What ties this together, though, is what the fishermen found, and then years later, how Yancey described getting rid of the bodies. And this is really graphic, but they would rape and torture the women, cut them open, basically take everything out of their insides, fill it with rocks, and then bind it with wire and throw it in the lake. And that was very common. And apparently, when the fishermen found this bag of body parts, there was around the torso some wire holding it together. So again, there are so many elements here that lead back to this serial killer, even though he was never, ever convicted of a murder. Very, very strange.
Yeah, very strange. And what a very strange way to, get rid of a body and open it up. This is just so sadistically mind-boggling and just
but so organized.
Terrible. Organized.
But so organized.
So terrible.
Like every other part of the crime.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't even really described the trailer yet, and I'm going to get to that. But like every other part of the crime, very well thought out. Yeah. Right? And that comes from experience. That comes from experience of dumping bodies in the lake, seeing them float back up, seeing them get bloated with gases, knowing that you've got to tie them down. Oh, this is a better way to tie them down. Oh, this is a way that'll make the body sink. It won't rise again. There won't be evidence. The body will be consumed by the animals in the lake. So this is a pure evolution of a serial killer.
Well, and again, you said, we know he was never convicted any of this, but there are other victims. Angelica Montano was taken to the trailer, held captive, raped, and tortured. Now she's actually released on a highway, calls police, but there is no follow-up with her. What? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so what we're starting to see now, we've been talking about the potential murders involved with this serial killer. He didn't kill everyone. That
Right.
wasn't part of the game. He was not only into rape and torture, he was into drugging his victims and keep them in such a drug state that when he released them, threw them out of the car on a abandoned highway and let them walk to find them or them walk into town, that they had absolutely no idea what had happened to them and could not
Wow.
even piece together a credible story. So with Angela Montano, he does release her. He had raped her, he had tortured her for a significant amount of time in the trailer. She's drugged up the entire time. He
Hmm.
releases her on the highway. She's actually picked up by an off-duty police officer, but she's totally incoherent. He doesn't really believe her. He drops her off, I think, at a bus station, and there's no other follow-up at all.
Wow.
And she's not the only one. There's several survivors here that tell and over time, over years, start to piece together this story. Kelly Garrett is another one. She actually went to a bar with Jesse Ray with his daughter, right?
Right.
And Jesse apparently drugged her beer.
Okay.
She then takes him to Ray's house, where he tortures her for at least 2 days. But he drugs her up, right?
Mm-hmm.
During this entire time. Then he drives her home and tells her husband, hey, I found her and she was incoherent. The husband didn't believe her story, didn't believe she didn't know where she was or what she did or who she did it with, and ended up filing for divorce.
Oh my gosh.
Because these women are so out of it.
Right.
What do you mean you spent the night with him? What do you mean you spent multiple nights with him? What do you mean you didn't know what you're doing? Because who thinks
I know.
that
Yeah.
somebody is being held captive and drugged up and so disoriented they don't know what happened to them?
I mean, that's just absolutely incredible that he is able. I mean, drives her home, John, and has the arrogance to tell the husband that he found her incoherent on a beach. I mean, just the confidence of this guy and that he's just never going to get caught.
But yeah,
Wow.
but how confident is he that he's letting these women go? Right?
What?
That's taking it to another level.
It is.
So he's not just killing some of them. He feels that he can control their mind. He's doing experiments on them in the trailer. He's drugging them up. He's videotaping him. He's recording him. He's so bold. He thinks he's so good that I don't even have to kill him anymore. I can put him out on a highway. I can drop him off somewhere. They can be found. I can even drive her to her husband. And he's not going to believe her. But, you think how many guys would jump over? She went out, got drunk, went home and slept with somebody. How many guys would make a jump to she was kidnapped, she was filled with drugs,
Exactly.
she was raped, and now a good
Yeah.
Samaritan's bringing her home?
I don't know. Unbelievable.
But it does show how narcissistic this killer is and how confident he is in his abilities.
Well, and then we talk about, MO of these killers, right? Sometimes it's the torture, sometimes it's the rape, sometimes it's the actual murder. But this guy had all kinds of tools that he was torturing women with.
Yeah, and so when you talk about what are we looking at here? Where is this guy getting off? Where is he getting his jollies? Is it murdering the women? No, because we know he's letting some of them go. Is it the torture? Certainly. I think the torture is a huge part of it. But I really think it's the mind control. He almost sees himself as a mad doctor or a mad professor, somebody doing experiments on human beings and able to control them. And this goes back to a case that we know he was fascinated with from years before, and I don't remember the woman's name exactly, but she was kidnapped and held by her captors for 7 years.
Oh, well, there was definitely an Austrian case about that. I think she was held for closer to 15 or 20 years and had bared 4 or 5 of his children in the basement.
Yeah.
So,
I Yeah, and I
unbelievable.
think this one is a California case or
Mhm.
whatever. Maybe it'll come back to me in a minute here, but we know he was fascinated with that. So I
Alright,
think it's the mind control. I
okay.
think it's the mad scientist part of him. So as we're profiling this killer, we're like, you always try to figure out what is his trigger, what is, where is he finding his enjoyment? Is it the kidnapping? Is it the rape? Is it the torture? Is it the murder? Is it cannibalism? Where is it on the spectrum? And here, I definitely say torture, but I'd also mix that with this experiment that
Yeah,
he's doing on these women and the drugs he's using to control their mind, because he's also into hypnosis, right?
right.
And hypnotic suggestion. And he's giving them drugs that place him in a state where they're susceptible to it. We know he tortured and presumably killed some of his victims. In the toy box, there were whips, there were chains, pulleys, straps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades,
Mm,
electric shock machines, and saws.
mm,
We know he had a gynecological table in there. And we think that he tortured many of these women for weeks or months at a time. And his accomplices knew about it and even assisted with it.
mm,
Um, so this goes beyond any normal torture. This is almost into the mad scientist category. And how we can kind of verify that, I told you there was lots of recording equipment. He
mhm,
would record the victims um, and watch the victims. So he would place them in certain positions where he could watch himself and his accomplices rape and torture these victims, and the victims could watch them being raped and tortured.
ugh,
That's how he would position the monitors and the cameras. He kept a diary. I talked about that. So again, it was almost like a mad scientist, right? Keeping a
mhm,
diary of his experiments and what he's doing and how he's doing it and describing the victims and describing the reactions. He also made several audio tapes, tape recordings with a tape recorder that he had, and said, "I get off on the mind games." That
mm,
was one of his quotes from one of the recordings. So that's what he's focused on, the torture and the mind games. We know that he used sodium pentothal
mhm,
and phenobarbital, both drugs that will put you into a state where you're receptive to like hypnotic suggestions, and it would
mhm,
confuse you. They would make you susceptible to hypnosis and auto hypnosis and hypnotic suggestion. Um, he would he would tell him, "I'm going to keep you drugged for days while I play with your mind.
jeez.
And by the time that I get through brainwashing you, you're not going to remember a thing about our little adventure." From a profiling standpoint, this goes way beyond the normal torture.
Mhm,
He is messing with their mind, and it all ties back to the pornographic magazines that he was shown as a 14 and a 15-year-old, the sadomasochistic bondage.
yeah,
It all ties back to that. He is torturing and tying up and drugging up these victims for days or weeks or months. So it's understandable when they get to the police or back to their husband,
Yeah.
their story is so fragmented and scattered.
Mhm.
What officer could make sense of it?
Yeah,
Who could
and
believe
again,
it?
it's you like you said, nobody's gonna the mind doesn't rationally go to somebody's drugged her and now she's confused. It goes to she had too much to drink last night and blacks out and doesn't
Right.
remember what happened to her, you know? So you have this sort of battle of, and where do you go with this? I mean, they can't, the stories probably don't even add up. I mean, the pieces are all so off because they probably only remember bits and pieces of some of the
Right.
stuff. So there's just nothing really to go on. I mean, I would think of there's really probably just not much to go on.
Well, there's not. The story is fragmented. What do you
Mhm.
mean you disappeared weeks ago?
Yes.
You're
See?
kidnapped for weeks and you're held where? And you have no idea where you were, where you came from, or yeah.
Yeah.
So I can certainly understand, when these survivors were found, their stories just did not make sense.
Yeah.
And we know there were at least those 3 survivors that we talked about. We think there were anywhere between 14 and 16 victims. But most haven't been identified, quite frankly. There are no confirmed murders because there were no murder charges brought against them. But one of the things that you and I talk about is with the technology that we have today,
Mhm.
and when these bodies are found, or when body parts are found, or when we can discover more of these victims, hopefully we can tie them back to this serial killer.
Well, I wonder also if they are still recovering bodies from the lake or continue to look for bodies in the lake. Do we know anything about that?
Well, but it wasn't just the lake.
That's true.
The Yancey and Henley both said that yes, he would dump some victims in the lake,
Mhm.
but he also had access to these very remote areas, like you were talking about. And how many bodies could he have dumped there? And what did he do with them? Did he bury them? Did he semi-bury them? Did he just dump them? There's a lot of land out there in rural New Mexico that,
Mm.
quite frankly, people just don't go to. And can
Right.
you imagine the condition or the state of a body that has been out there 10,
Mhm.
15, 20 years? You're going to find bits and fragments. And hopefully at some point, though, we're going to be able to tie them back and confirm some more of these victims. From an MO standpoint, we do know that he picks some up himself at bars in Albuquerque and in Phoenix. We know his daughter also picked him up in bars in those places. We know he went to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and picked some people up there. So he was actively going out and searching for victims, but so were his accomplices. We know he held some of these women for weeks and up to 2 or 3 months. He tortured them with whips, chains, electrical shocks,
Yeah.
blades. He played orientation tapes to hypnotize them. He invited friends and his accomplice to rape them. He drugged them to induce amnesia. Dismembered some, dumped others, but had manufactured bondage devices in the trailer, and the trailer he nicknamed the toy box. So I want you to kind of picture this toy box. It's
Okay.
a large trailer. It's got soundproof walls, and it's got a fortune. What we know, over $100,000 of equipment in
Crazy.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely amazing. And it wasn't a small trailer. It was 15 feet by 25 feet. It had an
Jeez.
OBGYN table in there. It had mirrors positioned so the victim was forced to watch themselves being raped and tortured. The electrical generator powered the shock machine that he was using to torture his victims with. Video cameras that were positioned in a way so the victim was forced to watch themselves on TV monitors that he installed. This goes way beyond organization, planning, preparation. I mean, what do you think of this toy box, Brandy?
I think it's a hobby. I mean, as weird as that sounds, this is what he does with his time. I mean, besides working, this is what he does with his time. And you then bring people into that world. I mean, that just shows the narcissistic perspective of this guy. And over $100,000. Again, to me, that's somebody who's investing in something they enjoy doing and creating. And this was his thrill. This is what he liked to do. He wanted to kidnap, rape, and torture people. He did it in a soundproof trailer. I mean, in Elephant Butte, New Mexico. And then you're making them watch themselves as you're torturing and raping them. I mean, it's just sick.
If you're a true crime lover and collect true crime t-shirts, wine glasses, stickers, hoodies, earrings, or other fashionable items, make sure you check out our True Crime and Wine logo apparel. And more at shoptruecrime.com or at the Casaro Winery website, casarowines.com. So check out our True Crime and Wine selection of all kinds of collectibles and enjoy them as you listen to our podcast of True Crime and Wine. Now, Brandy, let me tell you a little bit more about this toy box, this trailer, this torture chamber. He had a fur-lined coffin in there.
Okay.
He had a pillory. You know what a pillory is?
Isn't that the way you put your arms and head through?
Yeah, in medieval times, you'd see the people in the square, and they'd have their arms in there, the head, and it would lock over them. He would put them in there to rape them and torture them.
Where do you even buy one of those?
I have no idea.
That's just unbelievable. Like, okay.
Do they really sell pillories? I may have to go on Amazon and see if. Where do you get? He probably built it.
Interesting.
He probably built it, right?
Good call. Yep.
If he built this entire trailer and outfitted it with the straps and the pulleys and the chains, the recording equipment, right?
Yeah.
He built a pillory.
Yeah.
You know,
crazy.
He wanted the victims to see it, so he'd set up the TV cameras and the monitors so they could watch what's being happened to him. And again, he drugged them substantially the entire time with barbiturates to induce amnesia and to prevent them from having a coherent story to give authorities. So, like you said, it was a hobby, it was a game, he was invested in this and investing in it. And his takeaway wasn't just a rape and torture anymore. It's, can I drug him up? Can I do these experiments on him? Can I play these mind games? Can I hypnotize them? Can I mess up their head so much with these drugs and what's happening that I can release them out on a county road where I know they're going to be found, and yet they're not going to remember anything or enough to get any story to the police. So to me, this is taking that serial killer game that they play with the authorities to a different level. We've had serial killers write notes. We've had serial killers put themselves into the investigation. We've had serial killers actually cover their own crimes as a reporter. But this really is taking it to a new level. I'm giving you your victim back.
Yes.
I'm giving her back to you, but I've messed with her mind so much, there's nothing you can do about it.
And then I'm also thinking of, well, again, goes back to the confidence of releasing them. And I was thinking to myself, though, were any of these women reported missing? Were they ever looking for them in these 2 to 3 month time frame? Do we know?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know. It seems like some of them should have been.
Yeah.
I do know that in a couple of cases, the women did kind of, frequent bars, but did they not have
Yeah.
a family or a loved one? Maybe that's why he brought the woman that was married back so quickly. He only kept her for 2 days. So maybe
Mm,
he discovered some of these women were vulnerable, maybe didn't have attachments, and he thought he could keep them for a much longer period of time. Whereas with the
great.
one that, was married, he did what he wanted for 2 days and brought it back. But I mean, can you believe the narcissism in this guy that he brings the tortured woman back to her own husband, and then the husband's
Wild.
like, I don't believe anything you say.
Crazy. Well, John, we do know he would kidnap at least 4 or 5 women a year, hold them for a couple of months each. Um, and we don't know how many people he's actually killed. I mean, this is
No.
just an uncertain number. But police believe that he raped, tortured, and killed up to 60 individuals throughout his life, but they have just not been able to locate any of their remains. But he did keep that detailed diary you mentioned of what he did to each victim, but it did not disclose where he buried their bodies.
Yeah, so that really tells me that he was more into the experiment, right?
Yes.
That the diary was very detailed of what he did to him, how he did it, what drugs he used, how he drugged him up, all the elements of torture. So what does that tell us about body disposal? He doesn't care about them, right? That they were
That's
a
right.
scientific experiment. He's done with them. He has no use for them. I really think maybe this is where Yancey came into play. I'm going to let you help with the experiments and rape, and you're going to get rid of the bodies for me. And you're going to take them out, and you're going to, I don't know for sure, but I'm just saying, at
Yeah.
looking at his head and his mind, he's getting off on the mind games, the drugs, the amnesia, the torture, and he doesn't even put in his diary what he does with the bodies. They're so insignificant to him at that point.
Is that what it is? Just insignificant. And so he doesn't take the time to actually write where they are? Or do you think he just never wants to be able to find them?
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
so. Yeah, he does go to great length when he disposes them of in the lake.
Hmm.
But then again, is that Yancey going to the great length, or does he really want to do that? If we look back and we believe he killed the auto shop owner, we know he shot him and just threw him in the lake.
Yeah.
Um, we don't see a whole lot of desire for the bodies not to be found, but certainly that could be part of it. He might not write it down, but most of these killers, when they're writing that much detail, they include everything.
Yes.
They want to make sure they remember where they dumped the bodies in case they want to go visit them again.
Mm, okay. Well, he leaves it out of his diary, doesn't put where any of the bodies can be found. And again, like we said, there really has none of these bodies have really been located. A few that they think are related to, Tim, he's responsible for, but nothing definitive. We also talk about, John, the geographic profiling of this guy, right? So we know that he's picking up people in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and Elephant Butte, New Mexico. So this is his sort of playground, if you will,
Yep.
of where he's finding his victims. And he's very comfortable in his soundproof trailer, right, at his house as well. And then we
And
know
he's got
he's
some
getting,
property, right? And
yep,
there he doesn't have neighbors right next to him, and
yeah,
it's gated, fenced
mm,
off. I wouldn't say gated, but fenced off piece of property, a little bit away from anywhere else. But that's why he soundproofed the trailer, and certainly that's where he's bringing them back to.
and then he's dumping them, again, dump sites where you're comfortable leaving the victims. Most of them were dumped in Elephant Butte Lake, or some of them, or nearby ravines. So anything you're picking up on this geographic profiling, he doesn't seem to need to go far. He's working for the Parks Department. He has isolated areas that he's used to frequenting and knows his way around. Seems very just comfortable in his backyard, John.
Yeah, in smaller cities, bars, he'll venture into Phoenix every once in a while, but I think there's enough victims that are close enough to him that he can find them really easily. We know his comfort zone is certainly his house, his soundproof trailer, his property. That's where he's keeping him for weeks or months. You don't do that unless you feel very, very comfortable there. No one's going to suspect you. No one's going to hear him. No one's going to see him. No one's going to think anything's out of the ordinary. And then again, we know he dumps them in the lake, but he also dumps some of the bodies in ravines and remote areas. Again, he has access to them. So geographic profiling, he's fairly normal for other serial killers, going out, finding victims, having accomplices lure victims and bringing them to him. He's doing both of those things. So if he doesn't go out and find the victim, they're brought to him. And then he commits the acts where he's most comfortable in the trailer that he spent quite a bit of money on. And then to me, he's just really disposing of the bodies. I'm done with you. I've used you up. There's nothing else I need with you. From a victimology profiling standpoint, and this may tie back to your question a few minutes ago, were there any missing person reports? Not everybody was picked up in a bar, right? We know that one woman was, I think her name was Kelly, picked up in a bar, and maybe that's why he knew she was married, had an attachment. Somebody would report her missing. He brings her back after just 2 days. Many of the victims we suspect, though, were homeless individuals out wandering, or hitchhiking the highways across New Mexico, maybe going from the East Coast to California or California back east. And so if that was the case with a majority of the victims, that they weren't picked up in the bars, that they were found along the highways and byways, who's going to report them missing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The last time I saw my daughter was 2 months ago. She said she was hitchhiking in New York. I haven't seen or heard from her since.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, he only kept the woman he knew was married. And you know what? If he is talking to these people, that's easy information to find out very quickly. Where are you from? Do you have family local? I mean, these are just simple questions that people, will give some information, not thinking anything of it.
Right. And then he knows, wow, I've got somebody that no one's going to look for her. No one's going to think she's missing. No one's going to care about her. I can keep her for months. So the geographic profiling is starting to come together. The MO certainly has been together for a while. His bondage, torture, drugging routine, victimology is, again, vulnerable women. And we see that every victim, except for, maybe that murder back in the 80s of the auto repair store, auto repair shop, is women. And he certainly has this thing against women, wants to see them tortured, wants to see them bound, wants to drug them up, wants to control them. And that may even tie back to his earlier days as kind of a loner and somebody that, didn't have a lot of girlfriends. So, we're certainly seeing all aspects of the picture come together. And this is kind of where his downfall starts.
So there is someone who they kidnapped, John, Cynthia Vigil. They abducted, Ray and Hindi abducted her from an Albuquerque parking lot.
So that's him and his girlfriend. Yeah,
that's correct. Him and his girlfriend. So they end up taking her to Elephant Butte and held her in the trailer and tortured her for 3 days. Thankfully, she actually finds Ray's keys when he leaves for work. She unlocks herself, but then she is caught by Hindi and they start fighting. And then Vigil ends up stabbing Hindi with an ice pick.
Yeah, I think she actually hits her with a lamp, breaks a lamp over her head, disorients her a little bit, and then stabs her in the neck with an ice pick. So, I mean, this is I can see this scene playing out, right? This is
Absolutely.
like a movie. But isn't it just wild to think about? He's capturing these women, tying them up, raping them, drugging them, and then he just goes off for work.
I know.
And then he comes back and does it again, and then he just goes off to work. So remember, he held this job his whole life.
Yep.
So he wasn't missing work. At work, they thought nothing was amiss about this guy. Oh, there he is. He's on time for work again and doing his job.
You know, and I also wonder if somehow Hindi and him actually had different schedules. So somebody could stay behind with the victim. Because if you're keeping them for 2 to 3 months, I mean, you just leave them and go to work, maybe sometimes. But I think they were able to do this and get away with this for so long when it came to one watching while the other is gone. So I would not hesitate to think that maybe they kept two different schedules with the Parks Department to ensure that someone was there watching them.
Yeah, maybe so. They have to be fed at some point. They have
Yep.
to be, use the restroom, things like that. So yeah, that is quite possible. And what I think, did he give Cynthia Vigil a lower dose?
Mm.
Had he started drugging her at this point? Was he trying different experiments? Because she was coherent enough to
Yeah.
see that he left the keys, to grab the keys to unlock herself, and then Henley walks in?
Yeah.
Or Hendy sees this at some point, and the knockdown drag out fight ensues, and Vigil wins and
Yeah.
gets away.
I mean, amazing, right? Fight and flight. That's all that's all she's thinking about. So now this leads to his arrest, right, John?
Yeah, because she flees to a nearby trailer wearing only a slave collar. So
Oh my
she still
gosh.
has the slave collar on her. She still has the chains and the padlocks on her, but she's naked, and she runs across the property to a nearby homeowner, and they call police. So
Wow.
police immediately, I mean, she's literally next door to where she's been held captive, and leads them back to the trailer. And eventually Hendy, his girlfriend slash accomplice, Yancey, his, worker bee helper guy, and his own daughter are all arrested because Cynthia Vigil was able to escape.
Mm, mm. Cynthia, I can't even imagine how many more victims would have been fall to his hobby if it wasn't for her. So what a terrible thing to go through, but what an act of courage, really. John, what kind of evidence do they have against him with this arrest? Are they
Well,
holding him, questioning him? Is he admitting to anything?
Well, they have the whole trailer, right? They've got
They
everything.
do.
They've got the torture trailer. They've got diaries. They've got the audio tapes, which are just Brandy. My gosh, if you listen to these audio tapes and how cold and calculated he
Ugh.
describes the things that he does, and how he does it, how he
Uh-huh.
tortures the victims, absolutely, absolutely incredible. They have drawings. They've got all types of information here. And they're going to bring him to trial, right? Ray's going to
Yep.
go to trial. But the judge separates all of the cases, right? He separates
Okay.
all of the cases from the survivors. And the prosecution really worried about that, because said, wait a minute, if you don't separate the cases, judges, Mr. Judge,
Mhm.
each one will vouch for the other, and it'll tell a story, right? Because
Right.
each victim will say, well, that's what he did to me. Well, that's what and then it'll show a pattern of behavior. It'll show how the accomplices helped. Everything would be tied together.
Yeah.
Not only did the judge separate them, though, he ruled that a majority of the evidence, including the audio tapes, couldn't be admitted into evidence.
No, I don't understand that at all. Why? Because it could not maybe not be his voice.
And well, I think what they said is that the way the evidence was collected, the
Oh,
way the victims portrayed themselves. I mean, it's just a bad ruling, and
absolutely.
eventually, we'll catch up with them. But the first trial ended in a mistrial because the jurors didn't believe Kelly Garrett's story. So
Ugh,
this goes back to her telling her husband, this is what happened to me, and the husband didn't believe it and divorced her.
mhm,
And now the jurors don't believe it and said, we don't know if she was really willingly went to the trailer and
mhm.
willingly participated in these acts. They just didn't believe her story. They didn't think she was
That's
credible.
wow. Wow.
And Ray's defense the whole time was, we did all of it. We did
Yeah.
all of it. We gave her drugs, but she wanted the drugs. We had sex with her this way and did this to her, but she wanted it. She asked for it. She begged for it. It was all consensual. And why wouldn't it be?
Right.
Because we've got two different accomplices here that are also saying it was consensual. So the first trial was a mistrial. Eventually, in 2001, though, he is convicted on 12 counts of kidnapping and torture. You still only have the 3 victims, but now you've got multiple felony counts, right? So
Right.
on Kelly Garrett, you've got kidnapping and you've got torture and you've got rape and you've got other charges. So that's where the 12 counts comes from. He's sentenced to 224 years in prison as part of a quasi plea bargain on, hey, I'll you know admit to
Mhm.
these or whatever. He said give Jesse leniency. She really didn't have anything to do with it. She didn't know what was going on, and he asked for that. So there were never any murder trials or convictions. Now, did they plan some?
Wow.
Yeah, they certainly did, because they wanted to get this guy behind bars. So
Right.
they convicted him of these and gave investigators more time to check into the body disposals and the murders. And Ray even said, I'll take you to where I dumped some of the bodies. So
Hmm.
they were looking at murder charges still, but this got him off the street. And remember, this is in 91. Well, let's go back to 99 when the original trial was a mistrial. Jessie Ray was charged with kidnapping and sexual assault. She pleaded no contest in that little bit of plea bargain, with her
Mhm.
dad, and received a 30-month sentence in jail and 5 years probation. So
Wow.
in 99, when we have the first trial, he has a mistrial, but she is sentenced to 30 months and 5 years probation. Okay.
Okay.
Now, Dennis Yancey, remember, he's the male accomplice.
Mhm.
He pled guilty to Parker's murder
Okay.
and said, yeah, I did that one, but Ray told me to do it. So I was under duress. Well, the jury didn't exactly believe him, gave him 30 years in prison. So still a pretty light sentence for murder. He was paroled in 2011, but quickly violated his parole and sent back to prison till 2021. So
Wow.
he spent a fairly decent time, about 22 years in
Mhm.
total in prison. Now, when Cindy Hendy's trial came up, um, she received a 36-year sentence, but was paroled in 2019. So a
Hmm.
fairly stiff sentence for her role in it, but
Mhm.
neither one of them received the huge sentence that the next year was handed out, the 224 years that David Ray eventually received.
Yeah, and like you said, and we've talked about before, it takes a lot of resources to bring people to trial. And unfortunately, when you have these many victims, or you're ready to, uh, bring them to trial for murder, you just want to make sure they get in prison and don't get out. And that was part of that 224 years, is just making sure that he's held accountable for something and that he won't see the light of day again.
And I'm sure the prosecutors looked at, very hard
Absolutely.
how the victim stories were, which, like you said, were disorganized. They had been drugged. They didn't know exactly what happened to them, except for Cynthia Vigil, and she's the one that finally got away. Kind of looking at some behaviors, psychological characteristics, we see a very organized, sadistic sexual killer, motivated by control and power. We really think that he had 40 to 60 victims. We know he played mind games with his victims. He brainwashed them. He had absolutely no remorse for them. Remember how I said he didn't care about them? He would throw them back out on the street. Hey, there's nothing you can do to me. Go find them. Or he would discard them. He actually, in some of his writings and recordings, referred to the women as packages.
Oh
That's it. They were a package he dealt with. Oh, and I remember that case. Colleen Stan. She was a female kidnapped in 1977. I'm pretty sure it was California, and held as a captive for 7 years. And as I remember it, if I remember that case correctly, she was actually, they built this box that they put around her head and would keep her captive in this box. I think I remember an investigation a long time ago and seeing some pictures of it, but he was fascinated with bondage, fascinated with pornography, fascinated with this Colleen Stan case, and I think he thought he was bringing it to a new level. I'm not just going to keep her head in a box. I'm going to take her whole body. I'm going to drug them up. I'm going to torture them. I'm going to rape them. I'm going to abuse them, and I'm going to keep them for sustained periods of time, just like they did with her. And unfortunately, Brandy, there were so many missed opportunities in this case.
I know.
There really were. Ray's daughter, came to the FBI in 1986. 1986. The original trials weren't till 99, remember? So in 1986, he came to them with information about abductions, but they simply said in their notes her information was too vague. And they never followed up on it.
Well, the FBI agent actually recalls her saying, that she alleged that David Parker Ray was abducting and torturing women and selling them to buyers in Mexico. But the allegations were too vague for the FBI. So you just mentioned that. But here's the thing. It's like, that's so specific. Like, I mean, but sounds kind of crazy, right? Like, so I do kind of see this, like, is she okay? Is she on drugs coming in alleging this? Is this really true? But this was a huge missed opportunity, John.
Yeah,
I mean, you have somebody going to the FBI who is family.
Yep. Is she retaliating against her father for some reason? But certainly, just like these other women, the authorities didn't think she was credible for some reason. Same thing with Montano. Remember the young woman that was dropped off of the road? She was picked up by an off-duty officer, a police officer, but he didn't believe her story, and he said, I'll be a good Samaritan, and I'll take you to the bus stop. And he actually took her to the bus stop. And then Garrett, we know Ray took her to her own husband 2 days after kidnapping her, and her own husband didn't believe her. So there were many, many missed opportunities in this case. And unfortunately, we may never know how many victims he actually had. How many women did he turn back out on the highway? that
Right.
simply were picked up or wandered off or hitchhiked and disappeared. How many bodies did he just dispose of? Maybe he didn't give to Yancey. Maybe he didn't take him to Butte Lake. Maybe he just threw him in this ravine or that ravine. We're never going to know because, like I said, when he was in jail serving his time, he did talk with authorities and say, okay, I'll take you to some of the victims or packages.
Mm.
But when officers picked him up and took him to Lee County, the correctional facility, to be interviewed by the state police who are going to take him out on these rural New Mexico roads and find the bodies, right? So they can give closure to some of these families. They can recover the bodies. They can do the DNA testing, all of that stuff. Start tying him to these crimes. Prior to him being picked up by the state police, he had a heart attack and he died.
Ugh.
And so these
Goodness.
bodies may never be found.
Mhm. That's just a streak of weird, I don't know, luck or, I also wonder though if Yancey and the daughter, and the girlfriend, you know, I feel like they probably know little more than what we found out that they know about where some of these victims are buried or about where he might have been during this time. But you're right. Like if he's letting these women go and if they are hitchhikers or they are homeless or if they are out of state, they don't even remember necessarily where they were.
Right.
So then you just maybe forget it, put it out of your mind, continue with life. I mean, a lot of these women have, bad homes and they're escaping maybe from where they come from. And so this, again, maybe to them is just another, they're another victim. They're a victim again of another person's wrongdoing. And unfortunately it's him, but I just can't believe he has a heart attack and he was going to show them where the bodies were buried.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's what he said. And certainly when we look at the numbers and looked at 4 or 5 victims a year, even when he, kept some for months, let alone the ones he kept for days or weeks, and start extrapolating that out. And then we add all of those years that he was married that we didn't know about any victims at all. I think the numbers could be actually huge here.
I agree.
A good thing, sometimes there's a grain or a speck of good that comes out of this. And one thing that I did discover is that Cynthia Vigil, who was the last victim that we know of, the one that escaped, that stabbed Henley with the ice pick, that went to the neighbors and got the authorities. She actually founded a nonprofit there in New Mexico called Street Safe, and that works with sex workers, vulnerable women, vulnerable populations. So she's trying to do some good with what happened to her to help other women that may be in a similar situation and find themselves, like you said, ostracized from their house, walking the streets, hitchhiking, running away, or whatever the case may be. And as you and I both know, Brandy, you live out there. I've done tons of work out there. We have many, many indigenous peoples that leave their family, leave their homes, and strike out on their own, sometimes by themselves, and are put in very, very vulnerable situations. And so the more guys, the more serial killers, the more sadistic, evil people we can get off the street, and the more women that we can save through projects like Street Safe and other nonprofits that are helping people out there. All of that is a grain of good in a terrible, terrible story about a serial killer and his toy box. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. at JJ True Crime and Wine. And of course, you can order our great Casaro wines at CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com, so that you can enjoy a great glass of wine as you profile with Brandy and I, the serial killers, during our podcast. Now, I think that about wraps up our business for today. And of course, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey. And as always, our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make the show even possible. And I invite you to join us for our next episode, where we'll go back overseas and feature a British serial killer whose mental health issues and drug abuse led him to kill victims from 4 to 92 years old. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.